the paradigm of how these workflows work in these companies and what capabilities you just don't need anymore and things that you didn't think about that you do need. It's just an entirely different way of thinking. And so I think that is why, AI is as big as it is. And, some of the conversations that really stick with me is hearing this is bigger than the internet. This is bigger than when that run up happened. I can understand why that is true because I think the paradigm shift is so significant when you think about the underlying capability of what we're seeing out of the core AI and large language models.
Hi, I'm Boaz, founder and CEO of Augmented AI, and I'm excited that you're tuning into the Shift AI podcast, a show that explores what it takes to thrive and adapt to the changing workplace in the digital age of remote work and AI. In today's episode, I'm thrilled to have Kabir Shahani as our guest. Kabir is the founder of Amperity Ventures, where he's helping build and scale the next generation of AI-powered companies. With an impressive track record as a successful entrepreneur, including founding Amperity and leading it as a CEO until 2022, Kabir brings unique insights into how AI is transforming industries from digital advertising to healthcare. If you're interested in the future of AI entrepreneurship and understanding how AI is reshaping traditional industries, you're not going to want to miss this episode. We also want to send out a special thank you to Augmented AI for sponsoring this episode. This is going to be a great show, and we're really excited to have Kabir on today. We're excited to learn more about his journey from founder to venture builder. Let's get to it. All right, Kabir, I am so excited to talk with you today, and thank you for joining us on the Shift AI podcast. Fired up.
Same here. Thanks for having me, Boaz.
Absolutely. Well, Kabir, I want to start a little bit. I always do this on the show, but I just want to start with your background. Such an interesting background. Before we get into all the business that you're doing now, I'd love to have you tell the audience about where you grew up and how you started. When I first met you, you were part of a really, really interesting and fast-growing startup here in Seattle. But take us through your background a little bit.
Yeah, no, great to be with you. We've known each other for so long and have been through so much life together. So it's really special to have this conversation with you. Grew up in Kansas until 8th grade. Awesome, Midwest upbringing, kind of small town vibes. Ended up in Seattle right before high school. Went to the University of Washington for undergrad. Met my wife senior year of college. So I always describe myself as being very local yokel. And went to a consulting job after undergrad. So this was sort of all the rage as you wanted to do some version of management consulting, technology consulting. I was very fortunate that I got a lot of support, and we'll talk about mentorship and some things like that, I'm sure, in this conversation. But I got a lot of support in getting into a company called Anew, which has been, a much bigger company today. It has been doing a great job. Was a joint venture between Microsoft and Accenture, and got really lucky that I was able to learn a ton and just spend time working on what, in hindsight, weren't the most sophisticated projects. You're talking old school Active Directory and Microsoft Exchange deployments, but got to see the world a little bit through that and be sort of the young gunner doing project management, and socially knew a couple of folks that had gotten a startup going and recruited me to join them. Didn't know what a startup was, didn't know what a stock option was. Always had sort of an entrepreneurial kind of headspace, always had that ambition, but no clear exact path. And so jumped at the opportunity. Again, my boss at Avanade was incredibly supportive. And I say to this day, I don't think I would be a founder if it wasn't for him, because he basically said, hey, go give this startup thing a shot. And if it works, good for you. And if it doesn't, just come back to work the next day. And I think very few people would do that. And he was just, from his own life experience, just was so kind and thoughtful to do that. And then unfortunately, that startup didn't go the way I think any of us had planned. But I did meet my co-founder for my first business, Aperture, which you were referring to when we met and had spent a lot of time together, and built that company, bootstrapped it for the first 3 years. Again, not knowing much about startups or venture or any of that kind of stuff, and figured, hey, we think we can just sort of do this. And a few years in, realized, venture is a great way to be able to get scale, particularly when you have product market fit, which I'd like to think we had at that point. And about 2.5, 3 years into the venture journey, so the company was about 6 years old at the time, a large multinational came knocking and said, hey, this is super strategic for us. We got to own the asset, and ended up going and doing that transaction, which again, you'll hear from me, learning is sort of the currency of life. Learning and relationships are the two sort of currencies of life, in my opinion. And, got the chance to work at a really large company for the first time in my career, at 30 some years old. It was nice to get that deal done. But then also to, more importantly, get to work at a company that was doing at the time a couple $1 billion of recurring revenue, selling product in 100 countries. And the business was going from kind of a data and services business to being more of a services and software business. And the CEO of the company was still there today, 15 years later, extraordinary leader, and actually didn't mind putting young people in big jobs, and called me up one day, kind of 4 months into my tenure, and said, hey, we've got these software assets we've acquired, and we want to put these things together and create a real commercial software business out of this. Would you take that on? And I jumped at the opportunity, was, young and early-ish in my career and didn't have kids yet and all those things. And so took a role that basically put me on the road 90+% of the time. And we hammered that thing out, and got to ride shotgun in the IPO. And they took the company public on, in part the back of that story and that software business, which we're super proud of, and had a really good run. Wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And ironically, was convinced the one thing I didn't want to do was start another company. And I know there's a lot of entrepreneurs, listening, and it's been a fascinating journey to kind of discover my love for creation and creating companies, because it was sort of this, building companies, as you know intimately well, can feel like chewing glass. And so I was looking for the sort of leverage point that wasn't, oh, well, I could be founder CEO. But I did know a few things. And one of the things I knew is I really wanted to work with Derek, who is my co-founder from Amperity and had worked with us at Aperture. And it was just somebody that I felt like I wanted in my life in that way, and we wanted to spend a lot of time together. And we stumbled upon the opportunity just by having a little bit of the space to think about, what are the big problems that we had seen in the Aperture journey. And one of those big problems was how you actually take data. And we're going to start to talk about AI here. I know the key theme of the podcast. Pre-AI, as we all know, was the machine learning run. And at Aperture, we had seen how challenging it was to take all kinds of different data and make sense of it in the context of marketing automation, which is what we were doing at Aperture.
And this is 2016 too, right? Roughly.
2015 is when we were like in that exploratory phase. We kind of technically started the company at the beginning of 16, but 15 was kind of the exploratory phase. And, to Derek's credit, had done a really nice job guiding our thinking through the technical elements that would have to exist to solve this really big problem. So at Aperture, seeing the challenges of a lot of different data sets and how they don't really connect, and they don't really come together in a way that enables, in this example, marketing automation use cases at Aperture, we really kind of put down these pillars of, well, we think we can use machine learning for the first time to actually connect this data as, as kind of out on the internet. We met a really incredible professor at the UW called Dan Suchu, who wrote a book called Probabilistic Databases. He actually literally wrote the book. And after spending a bunch of time with him, it became clear that we could maybe use these techniques of probabilistic databases and machine learning as applied to, don't fall asleep, record linking. That it turns out, if you can actually use machine learning for record linking, create these profiles of customers, well, there's use cases you can unlock across marketing, analytics, customer service, finance and reporting. It was just a really exciting moment to do that. And so we said, all right, well, we've got to start this company, right? Like, we've got people that want to ride and do this. We've got a big market. We were able to attract the funding to be able to go and do this. So we just gotta chase it.
And you were able to attract the companies too fast, and so it told me, when I saw Alaska Airlines and some of these other big companies join quickly, I thought, okay, there's something happening here in the back end that's really, really interesting. Can you talk maybe a little bit about those early days when you had a couple of great wins and some of those big logos came on board, and what that did for you as a company? I think a lot of the entrepreneurs in the audience are also trying to kind of position themselves in those early days to understand how how that works. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I appreciate you asking because it ties directly to what we're building at Amp It Up Ventures and how we're taking, frankly, the lessons learned, both positive and the ones, of course, there's a long list of things that I think everybody would say they would do differently anytime they reflect on an entrepreneurial journey. And certainly customer-driven development is everything. And so, we'll talk about Amp It Up Ventures in a few minutes, but fast forwarding to that, it's all about creating businesses that understand real problems for customers and work with those customers to solve those problems. And it's a real win-win. And that's, we really did sort of, at least in my little world, kind of invented that at Amperity, where we were able to work really closely with these customers. And we said, hey, look, we know you have this problem. We know it's unsolved, and it's really difficult to solve technically. And so we can go on our own and do it in a vacuum, or we can do it with you. And we think if we do it with you, not only will we create a better product and a better solution, and we'll solve it in a more durable way faster, but we'll also do it in a way that is really valuable to your business and the pain that you feel today. And I think that, plus some incentives and, developing the relationships with those customers creates the environment to be able to innovate and create like extraordinary software and understanding what has to happen around the software, right? Like business is not only the product, right? It's how do you deliver the product? How do you service the product? How do you build that community of customers that make a living, breathing organism that becomes the company? And I think that's something, to your point, we really focused on. And so before we went away and just sort of tried to do a bunch of product work, we tried to find the right customers that wanted to solve that, which turns out, you can make a playbook, which is now what we've done at Amp It Up Ventures. And every time we go and take on a new market or take on a new problem domain, we are unwilling to do it without customers in the passenger seat at a minimum.
Yeah. See, there's pain, there's problem. You have the partnerships. So remind me again, who are the early collaborative companies that came on board?
Yeah, really fun story on that. Alaska Airlines, Moet Hennessy, LL Bean, and here's a good motivator for entrepreneurs listening. LL Bean did a pilot with us. I'll never forget going to Maine in February. It's incredibly, I'd never seen piles of snow that high in my life. And we went a few times, and unfortunately, they didn't see enough sort of immediate value creation. They didn't feel the pain desperately enough to say, hey, we're going to take what you've built in this V1 and actually become a customer. So they did not graduate from a pilot to a customer. A month ago, they became a customer of Amperity. Isn't that crazy? 9 years later. And so you got to stay. I just find so much inspiration staying convicted and committed to the problem you're trying to solve and who you're trying to solve it for. And it may not be the right set of capabilities at that time, the conditions within that customer. And of course, like everything I'm going to talk about is enterprise, because that's my world. I know very little outside of enterprise software. And, when you really like get that connectivity between the problem you want to solve and the people that want to solve it and the customers that want to solve it, it'll happen. And you just got to stay dogged, right? And it's why I tend to not believe in pivots. I've said that from the early days of my entrepreneurial career. I don't think pivots are I'm sure there's examples of people that have pivoted very successfully. I've just never done it. I think you gotta get conviction and you gotta go.
Yeah, that's great advice. Now, you left Amperity as the CEO in 2022, and I'm really excited to talk about Amp It Up Ventures because there's a couple really interesting AI plays that's happening there right now. Maybe more. You'll talk to us about it. But as a founder, you never really leave your business. So can you talk a little bit about it's an opportunity now to talk about Amp It Up Ventures, but also maybe how you're still involved.
Yeah, it was a hard time. I think, like I said, even deciding to start a second company was a super hard decision. And certainly in hindsight, I should have taken a lot more time and I should have been more thoughtful. That being said, I don't regret, starting the company and creating that business and the extraordinary customers and the extraordinary people that I've had the opportunity to build that business with and continue to have the opportunity to build that business with. So there's sort of no regrets, right? Life happens, and life happens in a way that I think is there is a master plan and there is a design, and I believe in that. Not everybody does, but I do. And, being able to follow that has been really liberating and really inspiring. And like you said, you never leave a company and a company never leaves you when you're a founder. And there's all kinds of factors that play into what you do. But I continue to love my time working with Amperity customers and supporting people on the Amperity team and the great collaboration, including, our announcement on November 12th. I'll use dates because I don't know when we're posting this, but Tony Owens joining as CEO has been such a great win. I remember meeting Tony through a really good friend. I had reached out to some trusted folks in my network and said, hey, there's an active CEO search going and I want to know who you know. And I'll never forget this friend said, well, who you should get is Tony Owens. You'll never get him, but you should try to get him. And again, Boaz, we've known each other for 15 years. If you want to get me going, the only thing you got to do is say, well, you can't do it. And that was like challenge accepted. So obviously, the entire company, the board, the people involved worked really hard to sort of collectively evaluate and recruit the next leader for the company. And it's the right time with the right person. So that's a great, when you think about creation, when you think about being an entrepreneur, when you think about being a founder, there really isn't, hierarchy doesn't really matter, like in my view. Like I think you have to, and I would know, I've always said that, to be super clear. I think I've had to go through a lot in my own life, and I've had to go through my own struggle and go through my own pain to be able to land in a view that gives you that liberty and the ability to say, hey, I want to create, and I want to create in a way that makes the most sense for where I am in my life and for my family, which I, candidly didn't always prioritize. And I'm sure a lot of entrepreneurs listening can relate to that. It's really hard when you're in that hyper growth and you're as focused as people like you and I are, you sometimes lose sight of the bigger picture. And so I got that reminder, whether I like it or not, and I think I couldn't be more grateful for it. And being able to take that and say, all right, well, by God's grace, I, have some space to be able to really think about how I want to spend my professional time and what I want. I'm not thinking sort of like, well, what's my legacy for the world? I'm 42 years old, maybe in 10 years, I'll think more about that, or 20 years. Maybe I should be thinking about that. It's another podcast we can do is, when do you start thinking about, your impact on the world? But I think for me right now, my impact has to be with my family. And I certainly want to have a professional expression. And Amp It Up Ventures, I think, has become, we don't really know what the hell it is yet. We're figuring it out, and I'm happy to talk about it. But it's become the thing that I feel like gives me professional expression. I think it's become the thing that allows me to feel like I'm doing positive things for others, which I care a lot about. And so how do you go from living a life that's all about you to living a life that's about serving others, which I do think is the prize. And so being able to find the intersection of those things where I like to think that I'm serving others and having this professional expression that speaks to me is an unbelievable blessing. And I'm having a great time with it.
Before we go further with the interview, I want to take a moment to tell you about one of our podcast sponsors, Augmented AI, and how they are transforming businesses with Gen AI solutions. Augmented AI specializes in helping organizations uncover and address internal workflow challenges that Gen AI can solve. Their comprehensive process starts by identifying and prioritizing business problems, and then assessing each based on value, effort, and risk. Once a problem is selected, the Augmented AI team tests and validates the solution to ensure that it works. Only after this thorough validation do they draft technical requirements, which serve as a blueprint for building and deploying the solutions. The real beauty of partnering with Augmented AI is that they don't just stop at strategy and feasibility studies. They actually stand up the solutions and manage them for you so you can focus on what you do best. If you're interested in experiencing this innovative approach to deploying Gen AI solutions, visit simplyaugmented.ai and click on the Learn More button. That's simplyaugmented.ai. Now back to the episode. Well, you haven't posted a lot about it, though there's been little bits of teases here and there about the companies involved. One company is called Adora, one company is called Avante. There might be other things you have in the works, but maybe just lay out what you're doing and Amp It Up and how that's playing out for you right now. Because there's a really exciting businesses that are getting spun up.
Yeah. And we're going to talk more about them. And, to your point, like I'm sort of out of the business of posting about things and trying to create, all this hype and energy, which you think you got to do when you're a founder CEO. I don't think there's a choice. But again, I'll do anything for you and have any conversation. But this is not a habit of mine. I've turned down every podcast and, every article just because you got to put your energy, where it matters. And when you're a founder CEO, it absolutely matters in telling your story, and it absolutely matters in being more public facing. But with the companies, we'll absolutely obviously want to share, and we're going to let the CEOs do that, right? Like going back to this, like I like to think that I've played a important role and will continue to do that in these companies. But this is, Marco's time. This is Rohan's time, right? And I love having both of those entrepreneurs and CEOs as partners. And I like to think they love having me as a partner. It's a really nice dynamic. And so I can tell you a little bit about what we are, and then I'll tell you a little bit about the companies if it's helpful. Well, I'll say it this way. We don't know what the hell we are, right? And we're figuring that out. So I'll tell you what we're not. I don't think we're an incubator, even though, I've co-founded both of these companies with these extraordinary innovators and CEOs. And the reason I say that we're not an incubator is my impression of an incubator model is that you want to put a lot of bets out there, right? And you want to create a bit of a pipeline and throughput of companies. So some of them become winners, understanding that you want everything to win if you can, but let's not statistically likely. And so I think that's more of an incubator. The reason we're not that is we're not going to work on anything where we're not going to win. That's just, winning is everything. It's fun. It's inspiring. This well, like you're a competitor. And so we try to, as an organization at Amp It Up Ventures, not take anything on unless we have a lot of conviction we're going to win and we're willing to do the work to go win. So that's why I think we're not an incubator. We're not investors or venture capital because we're not deploying a fund, although that's certainly in our headspace. And I think, as time has progressed here, it's like, well, maybe we should raise a fund. And we've had some folks reach out and, encourage us to do that, which has been super humbling. And I'm so grateful for that. But, we do work hand in hand to get the companies funded, right? And so in the case of Adora, Village Global, which is an incredible seed stage fund, we sort of think of as one of our handful of capital partners where we were able to leverage the experience and reputation we have and get them connected with the company. And again, as a co-founder with these entrepreneurs and CEOs, being able to put the deal together and help get the company funded. In the case of Avante, raised from Fuse, incredible firm locally, and those guys are ripping. And so we've been able to put these deals together, although we're not venture capital because it's not, the capital that we're deploying. And then, private equity, we're not private equity because, we're not coming in and sort of buying a business the way you think of traditional private equity. However, what we are doing is really running very specific playbooks. And so, we'll go back to something we talked about early in the conversation around early customer development at Amperity. Well, that's a playbook, right? There's a defined way of running early customer development that, I've got conviction around, right? When you do the job for 16 plus years, as I did, you've got conviction around how do you do a management team on Mondays? How do you recruit great talent? How do you do a weekly business review and a monthly business review? How do you set a business plan? What are the milestones? You develop points of view that need to be adapted to specific companies and need to be adapted to specific industries, but generally are a consistent set of playbooks.
Similar playbook, yeah.
Right. And so we're coming in and partnering with these founders in a really opinionated way, right? Like we've got opinions and strong points of view, and we're asking for partnership and saying, hey, in terms of partnering to build this company together, we're going to ask you to do things a certain way. And of course we can adapt them. Of course we'll as a CEO, you have creative license in what you do, but actually I think the framework the feedback we're hearing is that it's not only incredibly helpful, we're seeing it in the results. I mean, you're talking two companies, and we can talk about specifics, with both that, have gone from first, money in the door in terms of raising to paying customers, solving a real problem that's really innovative. And we're going to launch these businesses to the world, and jaws are going to drop because they're solving real problems for real big name customers, some of which you've already mentioned.
Absolutely. Well, I'm sure these CEOs appreciate having a framework coming in. Well, maybe talk a little bit about each one as much as you can.
Yeah,
so,
of course.
so people are dying to hear about it. And yeah, let's flesh out Adora and Avante for folks.
Yeah, I'll be sort of high level because again, I think these are, it's Marco's story to tell and Rohan's story to tell because they are building these companies and they're doing the glass chewing, right? And I get the benefit of being able to be in the room and support them, and also very importantly, incredibly strong founding teams that we're seeing our companies put in place.
Well, I'm excited to have those two on the podcast.
100%. Like again, I would do anything with and for you, and I think the launching these companies in partnership with you would be a lot of fun. So, backing up, I'll talk a little bit about some of the characteristics of companies that we like to get involved in at Amperity Ventures, and we can unpack at a very high level the companies. I think about it as $1 trillion markets, right? So is there $1 trillion of spend, give or take? 2, are there tectonic shifts happening where, at the risk of sounding a little lazy, can you be half right, but create value because you're capitalizing on a wave in a real way, right? So you can't just say you're AI, as we've seen a lot of companies try to do. You have to actually do it. You have to actually use and develop large language models. You have to really get into the technical mechanics of that major shift. And that's a characteristic we look for in sort of how we build these businesses. And 3, are you a founder or a CEO that is committed to win? And that is your core focus. And so, the conversation, and I'll maybe now work backwards a little bit in terms of describing the companies. The thing that I have found just so much relief and liberation in being able to share with the CEOs I get to work with is just how hard it is. You don't have to be sort of this strong personality and pretend that like everything's easy and everything's great and you got it under control. It's a really hard journey. And maybe for others it hasn't been, but for me it certainly has been, having done it a couple of times in that seat. And being able to sit down and say, hey, look, the next 3, 5, who knows, 7 years could be really, really hard. And are you emotionally prepared for that? Are you mentally prepared for that? Is your family prepared for that? There is a level of sacrifice that you can't really understand until you're doing it. Again, if you want to do it in a way that where you're going to win, right? We see people try to do it, and you try to do it in a way that looks similar to a corporate job. And I just haven't seen it work. Again, from the early days. Now, at scale, it's a different story. You have different resources. People have, ways to be able to manage but even then, I think most CEOs, even at larger companies, would tell you it's an incredibly demanding job and it's incredibly high pressure, all of which is okay. These are choices we all make. And so I like to take time. And when I say time, I mean months, 4, 5. Rohan and I spent 6 months together before we decided to jump in and start building Avante. And a lot of the conversations were these things. So I think that's a key element. Both markets, so talking a little bit about Adora, Marco and the team at Adora are chasing what is approaching to be $1 trillion of digital advertising spend. And you can imagine, the disruption, and I know intimately well, the disruption happening in ad tech. When you think about first-party data, and obviously with Amperity, I continue to have a tremendous amount of passion, and we're actually building Adora in close partnership with Amperity because there's just a massive opportunity to be able to transform how brands communicate with consumers using AI and how you use first-party data to do that. So, Marco's background coming from Pinterest, coming from Google, coming from Meta, just understanding like the insides of how these ad platforms work, and now being able to help customers, really get the most out of the massive amounts. Again, approaching $1 trillion companies are spending globally in that space. AI is the enabler to that. And so you take an incredible domain expert with real AI that exists and real innovation and patents that are now being written around the software that's been developed and is continuing to be developed at the company with a problem. And I can tell you, having sat in the room with these customers, they understand exactly the problem they want to solve with Adora. They understand exactly how they're going to solve it. And again, as of November 13th, we've got real economic evidence of value and success we've created for customers. And so that's a great backdrop to be able to create and launch a company. And the story in some ways is similar. Avante really is helping, again, employers, brands, customers that are self-insured, which it turns out is most companies, kind of call it over a handful of hundreds of people, 400 or 500 people, actually don't just pay into insurance pool. They actually write a check every year for the cost of healthcare for their employees. And, you want to talk about a uniquely American problem and the opportunity to, solve something and create value in an ecosystem. You're over $1 trillion of spend today in the United States. Household names in the Pacific Northwest, billions of dollars a year that they just write checks for. And that cost is going up at 8%. It's beating inflation. And so again, AI presents this once in a lifetime opportunity in terms of the way in which LLMs can consume data, process data, serve up insight to really take, we're talking massive amounts of cost out of the system and drive real value. And that money can be used to really improve the lives of employees and Americans. And so Rohan, comes from this world, domain expert, has lived and breathed this world, understands all the difference, a very complex ecosystem in healthcare, as we all know, has an extraordinary background leading product in all of AI, understands, how to build great software. And, similar to Marco at Adora, has assembled an extraordinary management team at Avante. And so again, we're finding that we can develop high-level playbooks, put them in the hands of incredibly talented operators and really motivated founders, work arm in arm, and create a lot of value fast.
And now, before we dive deeper, I want to take a quick moment and tell you a little bit about one of our podcast partners. As a listener of this show, I know you're trying to stay on top of all things AI and tech, which is why you have to check out the amazing GeekWire podcast, produced by GeekWire and hosted by Todd Bishop. It's a treasure of insights featuring industry leaders and the latest tech trends that are shaping our world, and the perfect companion podcast to Shift AI. GeekWire podcast is where technology meets curiosity and covers the world of technology, startups, and geek culture. Expand your tech horizons and join the conversation. Tune into the GeekWire podcast today, a perfect complement to our own discussions here. Don't miss out. Follow the GeekWire podcast on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or your favorite listening app. Now back to the episode. That's awesome. So we're kind of getting towards the end of 2024 here. When do you think both these companies are really going to be announcing what they're doing? Do you think that it's going to be kind of at the beginning of 2025 or towards the end of this year? Like, what's the timing look like for
first half of 25? I think, they're at slightly different spots, but just, again, wasn't planning on doing both, had kind of like gone down the path, and then another opportunity came up and have sort of, dance cards full between two of those and the time I'm spending with Amperity. And so it's like, all right, I gotta make sure I stay, good on my commitment to have a little bit of a life.
They both sound like such amazing companies. I just love the notion that these markets are so big and that you guys are solving big problems. And I think that's a great lesson for entrepreneurs too, is that you can mess up a little bit if the markets are large enough and if you're solving the right problems. So I think that both of them are very different, but very exciting.
Yeah, thank you. I agree. And I can't tell you how fortunate I feel to be able to do this work with, again, you want to be able to help and support and guide. And, I always say, and I think this is where I'm hesitant to tell the story for them because this is their time. I got to do all that. I got to do it twice. And you know what, gosh, what a blessing. And so how do you use your experience? How do you use your learning to help other people have their time? I certainly had lots of people help me have my time, and I want to help others have theirs.
It's the perfect segue because I want to talk about mentorship. And when I first met you, you've always had along the way some really incredible mentors that were kind of a little bit of ahead. They had already done a bunch of things and they were coming back and helping you. Now you're paying it back and you're doing that for others. Talk a little bit about the mentors that you've had that have really impacted you along the way.
Yeah, I've learned a lot about this topic. One, it's, entirely divine intervention in my experience. You put yourself out there and the right people will show up in your life if you leave yourself open to it. I think it's important to be really curious. I mean, some of the greatest mentorships I've been fortunate to be the beneficiary of is because I think I was willing to say, like, I don't know. I don't have an answer. I have a bunch of questions. I just don't know what to do. And I think that vulnerability matters a lot. And in hindsight, it's actually a lot more than just mentorship, right? So it's really, there's three key roles, and that can be three different people or it can be one person. And I think that the way I describe it is, there's coaches, right? There's somebody who's really coaching you on what you should be doing and how you should be doing it. Because especially when you're doing it for the first time, building a business, the number of unknown unknowns is very, very high. And so coaches are really valuable. Then there's mentors, which I think tend to guide what coaching you need, right? They may give you some of the coaching, but they may just help point you to who you should be getting coaching from or what kind of coaching you need, which, by the way, as an entrepreneur, as a founder, can actually come from your executive team. And a lot of my best, coaches and mentors have been from people that I recruited into these companies that have taught me so much. And then there's sponsors, right? There's people that are talking about you when you're not in the room, and they're getting you meetings that you couldn't get on your own. And again, the coach, the mentor, and the sponsor could all be the same person. And I've certainly had that. And they can be different people, that you bring around and put into your life.
I love that. I love that framework. That's really, that's a great way to think about people that are helping you along the way, coaches, mentors, and sponsors.
Yeah. And, I think it getting to a place in your life, and it doesn't have to be all in the same dimension, right? Like, I think, certainly one thing I would think about differently today than I did 20 years ago, give or take, when I started building companies, is that you sort of think you have to get to a certain point or accomplish a certain set of things, or the scoreboard has to look a certain way before you can do any one of those things for others. But, you might be really good at something that has nothing to do with the functionality of the business, but is still, and you and I know this from our time together in an EO forum where we're coaching and mentoring and sponsoring one another on all kinds of dimensions, right? Completely independent of functional work. And I think that's what makes life so beautiful, is we can actually have relationships with one another on these different dimensions and support each other on different dimensions that, change over time.
Yeah. And to your point, when you're running a business, it's impacting your family, it's impacting your personal, and you need help on all fronts. So yeah, I think that's so true. Well, I mean, I'm sure you know this because you listen to the show. I always ask the same question at the end. And the question is, if in 2 words, if you can look into the future, all the things that you know about the 2 businesses and then these new 2 businesses and all the exciting things that are happening in this wave of AI, 2 words to describe the future of work, future of AI, what would those 2 words be? And then you can elaborate.
Paradigm and enablement.
Okay. Tell me more.
Paradigm, I've found that, not to quote probably a polarizing figure right now, or reference a polarizing figure right now, but as you remember, because I think you and I were in forum together in 2013, I went and bought a Tesla, and there weren't a lot of Teslas around. It was like, I think my VIN number is like in the early number of VIN numbers. Let's put it that way. And the paradigm shift was so significant because, again, it seems so obvious today, but at the time it was like, well, where are the spark plugs? Well, there isn't one. Where's a timing belt? Well, there isn't one. Like there's a whole bunch of things when you free yourself of the paradigm of an internal combustion engine that just sort of changes the game. And I think, I mean, AI is that on steroids, as we know. Like, so things that we think about, that's been my observation watching Marco build Adora and Rohan build Avante, the paradigm of how these workflows work in these companies and what capabilities you just don't need anymore, and things that you didn't think about that you do need. It's just an entirely different way of thinking. And so I think that is why, AI is as big as it is. And, I finished high school in 2000. I've talked to lots of friends and entrepreneurs that built companies in the 90s very successfully. And, some of the conversations that really stick with me is hearing, this is bigger than the internet. This is bigger than when that run up happened. And academically, just because I didn't really live it, but academically, I can understand why that is true, because I think the paradigm shift is so significant when you think about the underlying capability of what we're seeing out of core AI and large language models. And the reason I talk about enablement is, and something frankly I'm working on and we're working on inside of Adora Ventures, is that there are so many tools and so many use cases in terms of how you function day to day as a human being. And then of course, how your businesses function, that using AI is not only a competitive advantage, it's if you don't do it, I think you're going to get left behind. And so that's a little bit of the fear I have sometimes is, well, I'm not using this tool and I don't really do the transcription thing. And there's a bunch of stuff I'm not doing and not using AI for, because that's where I'm like the old guy a little bit on this stuff. And I'm pushing myself saying, no, I have to use AI for this because this is going to become the standard. I remember we were interviewing somebody and there was a few of us having this sort of debrief, and the candidate clearly used a bunch of AI tooling to sort of complete the take home in the interview. And I remember somebody saying, well, they used AI to do this. This was a few months ago. So things are changing so quickly. They're like, they used AI for this. Like, is that sort of disqualifying? And I was like, would we disqualify somebody for using Google to get information? And of course not. It's like saying we expect them to use a Dewey Decimal System to get the information. And so therefore they're disqualified. It's like now the standard, right? And I think that how you think about AI enabling you as a human being, and of course how that translates to the rest of your life, your personally, professionally, et cetera, is just something that's really top of mind for me right now.
Absolutely. Well, I think it's top of mind for everybody. And the more businesses that I talk to, the more I realize that people understand that they are going to get left behind, either as a business, as an employee, if they don't use some of these tools. So I think those are two great words. Well, Kabir, I was really looking forward to this conversation, and you didn't disappoint. It was really wonderful talking to you today. And I hope to have some of your companies back so we can learn more as they launch to the world. And I really, really appreciate the time with you today. So
Likewise.
Thank you for being on the podcast.
Likewise. Thank you for having me. And I look forward to the same.
That's a wrap. Thanks for tuning in. Such a pleasure to have Kabir Shahani as our guest on today's episode. His journey from bootstrapped entrepreneur to helping build multiple AI-powered companies gives us a unique perspective on the transformative power of artificial intelligence. His insights into mentorship and the importance of solving real-world problems in massive markets provides valuable lessons for anyone building in the AI space. If you want to stay connected with Kabir and follow the exciting developments of Adora Ventures, including their companies Adora and Avante, you can find him on LinkedIn. And for those interested in the intersection of AI and enterprise software, definitely keep an eye on their upcoming announcements in 2025. I continue to be amazed by the guests we've had on the show, and I'm excited about the ones joining us in the near future. I truly appreciate you spending your time with us. Thank you for listening to this episode, and don't forget to subscribe to the Shift AI podcast for more exciting interviews and to the Augmented AI Weekly newsletter for updates on how AI can help you scale your business. The Shift AI podcast is syndicated by GeekWire, and we're grateful to have the show sponsored by Augmented AI. Our theme music was created by Dave Angel.